magazine. It might be in a newspaper. It might be on a blog. And it might also be in a scholarly journal, right? So these are all going to be slightly different. So if an article is published on a blog, what it does is going to depend on who's writing the blog and what the purpose of the blog is, right? So blogs are very diverse. There are lots of different kinds of blogs. There are lots of different things that are published on blogs. What about newspaper? Like if an article is published in a newspaper, what does that tell you about it?
Credible.
It's credible, okay. So the newspaper is going to stand behind that. It's current, right? So newspapers try to get whatever you want to know about that day, right? What else?
Who's the audience of a newspaper?
That's a great question.
The general public?
Right, exactly. So the idea is that anyone could read a newspaper. What do you want when you go to a newspaper? If you're going to read a newspaper, whether online or in print, yes?
Information.
Information, okay. Can you be more specific?
Objective facts.
Objective facts. So you don't want a lot of opinions and moralizing.
Current events.
Current events, right? So you want news, right? So when you go to a newspaper, you're looking for current events, fairly objective facts, and credible. So newspaper stories have this really specific purpose and this really specific audience, right? What about a magazine? What is a magazine? It could be lots of things, right? So there are magazines that are science fiction magazines, and they publish like science fiction stories, right? There are magazines that are like beauty magazines, and they're like, hey, here's the makeup you should wear, right? There are lots of different kinds of magazines. But they also have specific audiences, and the audience for the magazine is going to depend on what the magazine is about, right? So when you look at a magazine, you might have some ideas about who's supposed to read it. Okay, so what about a scholarly journal? Like who, first of all, have you heard this term before?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. In what context?
I think we were doing a research paper for science, and then our teacher brought that up, but I don't really know like specifically what it is. Can't talk much about it.
So it wasn't defined at that time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Theater recordings on what they like found. So it's like they investigated something, so they like write an article, maybe so what they found about something.
Yeah. So you're saying they were looking at theater recordings, and they wanted people to know what they found in the theater recording. And they wrote an article in a scholarly journal about that. Yeah, that's a really good example. It looks like you had an example too. Your hand was up, I think.
It talks about like a specific academic topic.
An academic topic, yeah. So it might be science, it might be theater, but it's going to be an academic topic. So it has a different audience than either of those others. And I don't want to say, or I don't want to sound like I'm saying, that scholarly journals are better than magazines or newspapers. What I want to say about them is that the type of information you'll find is a different kind of information, right? So we talked a little bit about newspapers because I feel like you can be really specific about what a newspaper is trying to do. Scholarly journal is a little bit harder because kind of like magazines, they have many different audiences, right? So if you're looking at one that's about science, it has an audience of scientists, and usually of a specific type of scientist, right? So if you're a chemist and you make some discovery in chemistry and you want to publish your findings, you want that to be read by other chemists, and maybe other chemists of a particular type. I don't know anything about chemistry, so imagine some specific, very, very particular subdivision of that. Theater, same thing. There are people who are interested in the concept of drama, but there are also people who are interested in 19th century, or let's say late 19th century Irish theater by women authors, right? So people get very specific about what they want. So the audience for a scholarly journal is often very small, and often very well informed about that topic. So that's important. There's also this question of facts and objectivity, right? So we talked about newspapers and their attempt to be objective, and that's a really specific idea in the discourse of journalism. As far as scholarly journals, they're going to have different aims. So most of them are going to try to make an argument of one kind or another. Their argument might just be, hey, this data is really important, especially in the sciences. But if you're looking at literature, they're probably going to be making some argument about a reading of a work that they're looking at. So if they might want to say, well, 1984, we know these things about it, but no one's looked at it yet from the perspective of feminism, to make up an example. Someone probably has, but that's the kind of thing that someone would say. Okay. So, there are lots of different kinds of things we might look for. If we're looking for criticism, there's a few ways we can go about it. So, one of the things we might do is we might look in really general resources, right? So, there are some library resources that have a little bit of information on almost every topic, right? So OneSearch is one of them, and we got a little bit of factors with OneSearch before. You might also have encountered databases like that. For example, Academic Search Complete, right? So this is a database that doesn't specialize in anything. It's not a theater database, it's not a literature database, it's not a chemistry database. It's trying to bring in a little bit of information about almost every topic. So the advantage of that is if you don't know what the major databases are in a particular subject, this is a good place to go. And honestly, OneSearch is a very similar kind of resource. So if you don't know what you're doing, OneSearch and Academic Search Complete are good places to start. Okay, so we can try OneSearch. And searching in OneSearch is really different when you're doing this kind of search from searching in the catalog. And the reason it's different is that the words that you're using, and remember we talked about this, how your words have to match up with the words that are in the description. The words that you're using are matching with much more specific words. So, really simple example, if I were searching in the catalog, I would look for George Orwell. If I'm searching in OneSearch, or if I'm searching in Academic Search Complete, I'd probably do a different kind of search. I might search directly for 1984. Now, there are disadvantages to this. So if I go into OneSearch and I just do a search for 1984, do you think that's going to be a great search, an okay search, or like a bad search? Bad search. Why is it bad? 1984 is very big.
It's going to pull up things from the year 1984?
Yes, it is. So that's kind of a problem. So what should I do about that?
More specific?
I can be more, how can I be more specific?
I don't know if I can know author's name.
The author's name is good, yes. I can go, that might certainly be a way to do it. I could mention that it's a book. So I could say something like literature. So I could use a search term like that.
Also, on the resource type, you can like hit book, I think, I believe.
If I go resource type in book, then the things I find are going to be books,
Ah.
right? So that's what we did before. Right now, I don't want to just find books. I want to find articles too, or maybe I just want to find articles. So that's a helpful thing. It'll narrow it down, but it won't necessarily narrow down the topic. It's just going to make the number of things smaller. So I could do that. Yes.
So the topic or the control or
Yeah, that might be a good idea too. And I can't, in some databases, I can add more. Like here, I can say, I want more boxes, and it's awesome. Here I can't do that, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to change that. So something like social control. That helps. There's also one way that I want to broaden it. And I didn't remark on this when we saw it before, but it is important. When we were in the catalog, and I'm actually going to bring this up just to show you, and we were looking for Orwell, means that if a source has 1984 in it, I'll find it. And if a source has 1984 spelled the other way, I'll also find that. So what OR means is I don't care which of these two things I find as long as at least one of them is there. So you have to be careful about it, right? Like I would not want to put OR here. That would be bad because then I would find everything about 1984 and also everything about George Orwell. So I might find things that have nothing to do with the novel. But putting it in here is good because now I'm searching for both titles. I also use quotation marks. Yes?
Does the OR have to be capitalized?
That depends on where you're searching. In one search, it has to be capitalized. In academic search complete, it doesn't matter. I tend to capitalize it when I am doing a demonstration just because that way it stands out for people.
Oh.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Thank you. Okay, so do you know what the quotation marks mean? Quotation marks for everyone. This is often familiar to people because it also works on the web. Oh, yes.
Is that like not just the word 19, all those three words? Those
Yes.
three words.
That's exactly what it means, yes. So these words have to be next to each other in that order for it to come up. So I'll only do that if I'm very particular about how I want that. So I don't want the word 19 coming up by itself, right? But 1984 is the phrase I want. That's exactly right. Okay, so I'm gonna do a search. And I found a few things, right? So I'm gonna point out something about this that I think is important. And that is that one search is searching across disciplines. So there are some databases that only will cover a specific thing. So for instance, a literature database will only have journals that have to do with literature. There's an advantage to that, but it's also sometimes nice to be able to look at lots of different kinds of things. So if you look here, we have Global Media Journal, we have Utopian Studies, and we have the Journal of Literary Semantics, right? So by looking at the journals in which these were published, we get a better idea of what their perspective is going to be, right? Global Media Journal probably doesn't publish the same kind of thing that Journal of Literary Semantics does. So you probably want to think about that when you're choosing the sources that you're going to use, right? It tells you a little bit what the article is going to be like. So let's take a look at this one. And what I'm seeing here, and you'll see this a lot, so I just want to point it out. This is the description right here. It gives you an abstract, which is super useful. That's a summary. This one also gives you an abstract in French because this is a bilingual journal. It gives you these subject terms, which are a lot like the subject headings that we looked at in the catalog. And then over here on the side, it's on the left. That's where you get the full text. So if the full text doesn't appear immediately, look for a little button like that. Okay. So here's the article. We can't really evaluate the article right now because that's kind of a long and picky thing. But I do want to point out that it's often worthwhile to look at the list of references at the end. And there are two reasons that that's worthwhile. One reason that it's worthwhile is that sometimes they'll cite great sources and you'll want to hunt those down yourself. But that's not the only reason. The other reason is that you can see what kinds of sources people are using when they write about it. So here I can see this is an article about surveillance in 1984. Sure, that's useful. They've cited the Journal of Literary Semantics, okay, but they also have this chapter in a book about rhetoric and propaganda, right? So you can see where are they going for the other sources that they're going to use? Are they going to books? Are they going to things that are about 1984 specifically, or are they going more broad? So in this case, some of these are about 1984. Some of them are just about propaganda. Some of them are just about rhetoric, right? Propaganda and the ethics of persuasion. OneSearch is a good place to check whether we have it. If you don't see it in the OneSearch, ask me, I can double check for you, but most of the things that we have are gonna show up in OneSearch. So that's something I'd recommend. The other thing is when you start searching, you probably don't want to sit down and start reading whole articles right away, right? Because it takes a long time and slows you down. Probably the best strategy, and you'll develop your own strategies, but here's what I recommend. Read the abstract, skim the first page or so, and if you think it's worthwhile, put it on a list, save it however you save it, right? Come back to it later. What you're going to be doing is collecting a bunch of articles, more than you'll eventually use. You want to get a nice pool of articles, and then you can take the best ones when you start writing. That means that if something looks great but doesn't pan out, either because it's not what you thought it was or because you change your topic halfway through, you can throw it out and use another one of the articles that you've collected. So this is advice that I give everyone. I think it's really important. You want to read more broadly than what you actually cite. And that's why you have the Works Consulted page in addition to the Works Cited page. So that's the thing I would recommend. Okay, so OneSearch is pretty good. It's kind of familiar insofar as you can add more search terms. You seem pretty familiar with that. I do like, and I guess we talked about this a little bit before, under topic subject, I can narrow by topic, so I can choose to include or exclude certain things. And there's these other controls I can do. So I can say I only want the ones that are in English, right? I can say I only want the ones that are from 2000, let's say 2003 or later, right? Last, however long. Right. So you can control it in that way. It gives you certain options. So it's a good general search. Academic Search Complete, very, very similar. What you'll notice is that Academic Search Complete used to be really great for beginning research, and then for some reason it ended up getting a lot of really heavy scientific articles in it. So watch out, I guess. But it is good to use, and the way it works is very similar. Okay. There was another thing I wanted to say. It was important. Oh. It gives you a little bit of information, and I'm going to walk this way because I've been walking that way too often. It gives you a little bit of information over here about what kind of source this is, right? So it says this is an article. Usually, when it's an article, when it says article like that, it's trying to tell you that it's an academic journal article. However, it doesn't get that right 100% of the time. So you have to check for yourself. The best thing I can tell you, and we'll talk about this more next week, but think about who the audience is for this, right? Are the people reading this going to be people who have studied the work in question, or a different audience? Try to think about who's interested in reading it. You might see that some of them will say something like newspaper article or even conference. So you'll see some interesting ones. In this case, we just got articles, probably because we limited it to that, right? So if we were going all items, we would see a dissertation. I don't know what this is, but we'd see some other kinds of things, right? A couple dissertations. And we can talk about dissertations, but I don't want to take too much time